Welcome to another fantastic Faena Rose event. Tonight, we brought back the one and only Derek Thompson. Tell us a little bit about what we're going to discuss tonight.
We're going to talk about how to make America great again in a way that's real and not just a slogan.
You heard it from Derek himself. So as we like to say, strap in, get ready for another fantastic Faena Rose event.
You say the book is dedicated to a simple idea: to have the future we want, we need to build and invent more of what we need. What do you mean?
I think it's really important to think about build and invent as two different categories. There are some products in America that we know exactly how to build, and we just don't build enough of. Houses. Houses are a very ancient technology. The elevator, I believe, the working elevator was invented by Elijah Otis in like the 1840s. So we're talking about a technology that's 180 years old. And yet cities like San Francisco, Los Angeles, New York, Portland, Seattle, they simply don't build enough apartment buildings. It's not because they don't know how to build. It's because in many cases they either have rules or they have attitudes that constrain housing construction in the places where Americans most want to live. One, it drives up prices in the most productive parts of the country. And when you think about what the American dream really signifies, it's the idea that in this country, you can move here, live an affordable life, and work your way up into the middle and upper classes. But right now what's happened to America is that in a weird way, the American dream has sort of splintered. There's places in America that are affordable, but they tend to have very low upward mobility. And there's places in America that have very high upward mobility, but they're incredibly expensive. And so there are very few and a shrinking number of cities where you can move there, afford a middle-class life, and also have a chance of working your way up. And I think that's an American tragedy. But also, if you make it more expensive for people to live in productive areas, you move people out, you spread them out like peanut butter, and not only does that hurt innovation, in cities, it also raises housing costs across the rest of the country. So the housing crises that American cities have aren't just urban crises, they are national crises. So that's the build part of this. But there's also this other word, which is invent. And invention is this concept that you really don't hear politicians talking about a lot. Like, no one talks about an invention agenda for America. But when you think about decade over decade, or generation over generation, why does life get better, more convenient? Why do we live longer? Why do we live healthier lives? Right? In some cases, it's because we make better decisions. But in the grand sweep of history, the thing that's changed between Americans in the 2020s versus 1920s versus 1820s is not our psychology or not our biology, it's our technology. It's invention that makes the world a better place to live in, an easier place to live in, a place where people have more agency and power and where they suffer less pain. And I think both in the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, there's not nearly enough focus on the kind of changes to science policy and technology policy that would really make Americans' lives better. On the Democratic side, I think that attitudes are far too bureaucratic. I think the NIH, National Institutes of Health, for example, have become far too bureaucratic as an institution.
More process than impact.
Much more process than impact, exactly. And I think, unfortunately, as the personality type of the left has become more bureaucratic, the personality type of the far right has become more autocratic.
Right.
And so what you see in government today is not a movement to make government work better. It's a movement to simply cut down what government does, period. And that's a huge problem, because what we need, I think, to make America better is not destruction, but reform. And this is a book about reform in a world of destruction.
As we think about the next 20 years, next 30 years, where abundance actually becomes part of at the center of our politics and drives sort of the next generation of innovation and growth in our country, what does an abundant world look like?
There's a lot more housing in the most productive, high-income cities where Americans want to live. And that doesn't mean that we're trying to turn America into Manhattan. I more just want every city with rising housing costs to be a little bit more like Manhattan, to recognize that you cannot possibly solve the crisis of housing scarcity without building more housing. So it's a world with much more housing. It's a world of abundant clean energy. Much more electricity, much more energy than we have today is being pulled online. And that's not only making our lives cheaper, because everything in the world is essentially downstream of the amount of energy that we can create. It unlocks new possibilities in technology. there's all sorts of ways in which we're technologically constrained because we don't produce enough energy. I think there's a world in which 20, 30, 50% of America's water supply is desalinated. In Israel, a very significant share of the water that they drink comes from desalination plants. It's incredibly energy intensive. It takes an enormous amount of electricity. Where does electricity come from? It has to be generated either from coal or natural gas or from clean energy like solar and nuclear and wind. So we're building a ton more clean energy that unlocks new technologies like desalination or even cellular meat facilities that build or essentially design the perfect ribeye steak that isn't cut out of a cow that we have to kill and also keep alive and carve up a lot of grassland for, but essentially produce perfectly as if manufactured. That's very energy intensive as well. And it's also a world of abundant scientific breakthroughs that allow us to live a much healthier life. And then fundamentally, I think all of this adds up to this question of what's the good life about? I think it's about freedom, the ability to afford life, to afford your house and healthcare. That is freedom. Fundamentally, abundance is about technological splendor and scientific breakthrough, but I think fundamentally it's about the very, very personal feeling of freedom.